Hello, Hatter. We've been expecting you.
Cassie?
How'd you know it was me?
You're my sister?
Right. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. I've still got you exactly where I want you.
And where might that be?
Another world. One I've created just for such an occasion. One that would attract you and bring you right into my clutches. A sinister and evil, yet enticing world.
Really? Because it looks like Seattle.
Damn it, stop ruining all the mystery.
Sorry. You know me, I ruin all the spoilers.
Right. Well, it doesn't matter. You've got quite a winning streak going, Hatter. 5 movie wins in a row. We all know you lost all credibility with your fans when you said that V for Vendetta was better as a movie than a book, but I let it go. And then you said that Where the Wild Things Are was a better movie than a book. Come on, what were you thinking? But still, I let it go. But then you pulled that stunt with Secret Garden, letting the movie win when everyone knows that the musical far surpasses the movie and the book. That I will not let stand. I will break this undeserved winning streak.
And how do you plan on doing that?
Perhaps you know of a fictional world called Narnia?
In 1950, author C.S. Lewis published one of his best-known and most well-beloved pieces of literature, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
You will compare it to the BBC miniseries, and you will lose.
Very well. But, I haven't seen the BBC version in quite some time. I barely remember it. I need to watch it again, you know, in order to truly do the review justice.
That can be arranged.
Has not only enchanted thousands of readers, but has made it onto Time magazine's 100 best English novels between 1923 and 2005. Naturally, such a magical story lent itself well to the visual medium, and a number of visual adaptations were made of this story. One of the more well-known adaptations came from the late 1980s, done by BBC as a television serial, but I'm not altogether crazy about this version, and it sticks a little bit too closely to the story to make for an interesting review, so we shan't do it. Instead, we'll be looking at the 2005 Disney movie starring William Moseley, Georgie Henley, and Tilda Swinton.
Tyler!
No need to belabor the point, here's Books vs. Movies review of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Let's start by looking at the 2 sons of Adam and the 2 daughters of Eve, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy Pevensey. C.S. Lewis does a pretty good job of establishing 4 very different personalities and sibling roles. Peter, as the eldest, is the natural leader and acts as such, making the decisions and driving the group forward. Susan is the second oldest and the oldest girl, and so kind of falls into the maternal role, thinking of the well-being of the group and being the most practical of the 4. Lucy is the youngest, the most innocent, and the one who believes most easily in Narnia. And Edmund, well, we'll get to him in a minute. We see these personalities early on in the story, with Peter leading the way most of the time, Susan insisting that they grab the codes because it's cold, and also being the first one to insist that they go back to keep the family safe, and Lucy being the first one to go to Narnia and trusting Mr. Tumnus and the others most easily. These personalities are pretty well established in the movie as well, and they actually add a bit more drama between the siblings. For example, Peter's leadership isn't quite as unquestioned as it is in the book. Susan, for one, is rather insistent that they should all go home and leave Narnia to deal with its own problems.
But Mr. Tumnus, if he was arrested just for being with a human, I don't think there's much we can do.
And this does make her a little less likable, but it also makes her seem like more of a real big sister who's worried about her own. And in the end, she does actually fight alongside the Narnians. The bickering between Peter and Edmund is also a lot more personal, and there's hints that it has something to do with their past and why they're at the house in the first place.
Why can't you just do as you're told?
In general, the backstory of the siblings is much darker in the movie, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. I mean, they're in this house because of the war and the air raids, and it does seem kind of strange that the book would only give a passing mention of these events. At times, though, this almost seems like filler, stuff meant to pad out a relatively simple story. I've never been a big fan of adding drama where it doesn't need to exist, and it kind of feels like they're doing that sometimes here. And then, of course, there's Edmund, who's kind of the typical whiny little brother, very childish in many ways, but wanting to be treated like an adult. He's spiteful and often nasty to his younger sister, and of course he's the one that sells out his siblings to the White Witch so that he can get more Turkish delight. And in the book, at least, we understand his actions a little bit better. It's explained that it's not just Turkish delight, but enchanted Turkish delight, which makes him want more no matter how much he eats. And because he's spiteful and always wants to get the better of his siblings, the White Witch's offer of kingship is very enticing as well. But the fact that Edmund seems to be acting of his own free will in the movie makes his development that much more dramatic because it seems more like a choice that he's making rather than a spell being broken at the end. The White Witch's claim of power over him also makes more sense. Also, the book never really explains why Edmund is so spiteful. He just kind of is. In the movie, we have the backdrop of World War II, which not only explains Edmund's personality traits, but Peter's and Susan's as well. Also, it serves to bring the development of the four characters to a more complete circle, with Peter as a leader, Susan as a nurturer, Edmund as a fighter, and Lucy as an optimist. Because we actually see where these characters are coming from, we can better understand who they are and why they develop the way they do. For that reason, I think that the movie gives a better and more rounded portrayal of these characters. This story is a fight between good and evil, so now, let's go take a look at the ultimate good in Narnia, King Aslan, the Great Lion. Aslan is the ultimate good in Narnia, and therefore the movie portrays him as a big impressive lion with a big impressive voice and with sort of a heavenly glow about him. From the way that people talk about him, we know that Aslan doesn't come around that much. Most of the people in Narnia haven't really seen him. But we know that he is good, and we know that his coming, in this case, is a big deal, because Aslan normally operates indirectly, through influence or persuasion, not through direct force. So, yeah, Aslan is Jesus. But I appreciate that in both the book and the movie, he's portrayed as being both human in some ways, but also animal in some ways, i.e. not a tame lion. For that reason, I kind of prefer Aslan from the book. Because it has the advantage of words and an omniscient narrator, you really get the sense of what and who Aslan is, everything good and wonderful in the world. When he's first introduced, Peter, Susan, and Lucy immediately feel comforted and hopeful, despite the fact that they don't even know who Aslan is yet. As for the character himself, I think it's a lot easier to imagine this character rather than see him in the movie. I mean, it's a lion with human traits, and that's kind of hard to convey on screen. I'll admit that I like the voice of the character in the movie, but you really get a sense of his emotions in the book, his grief and his joy. Also, I'll talk about this in later rounds, but I'm not really crazy about making animals' lips move when they talk. It just doesn't look natural. Their mouths weren't meant to move that way. Also, the idea in both versions in the story is that while Jadis is strong, Aslan is still stronger, as illustrated by the fact that the deeper magic that brings Aslan back to life is stronger than the deep magic that Jadis used to kill him. You get the sense that she's weary of him in the movie, but not that she's actually afraid of his power, partly because the CGI lion doesn't look particularly intimidating. The power of his description in the book makes him seem very intimidating, and while this description is in the movie as well, it doesn't really have the imagery to back it up. In the book, Jadis is terrified of Aslan, and you can definitely see that in the way that she runs away from him after their first meeting. And since the idea of Aslan is that he's ultimately the victor, he really does seem more like the victor in the book. But what about the flip side, the ultimate evil, Jadis, the White Witch? Jadis is cold and cruel, the self-proclaimed Queen of Narnia, and she has made it always winter in Narnia, but never Christmas. She's a horrible tyrant, powerful enough to turn people into stone when she gets angry. And she gets angry a lot. But on the other hand, she's also seductive and can entice people to do what she wants. She pretends to be human even though she's not, and people are drawn to her because of that, because it's said that only a human can rule Narnia. There's nothing terribly complicated about her. She's pure evil, plain and simple. However, I prefer the White Witch from the movie. Not because C.S. Lewis wrote the character badly in the book or anything, but because of Tilda Swinton. I mean, what absolutely perfect casting. First of all, she really captures that cold cruelty that you would expect from a character who makes it always winter but never Christmas. But she also has a certain unearthly beauty about her. So in addition to being cold and cruel, she can also be very seductive, and you can easily see how she could entice all these people to follow her. I mean, she even entices some of the trees. I mean, how frightening is that? Even some of the trees are on her side. And this is something that the book really didn't touch on that much. And it makes Edmund's temptation not just one of gluttony and spite, but also one of lust, which is a whole new level of dimension to his character because he's on the edge between childhood and adolescence. They play around with Peter's characterization in this way as well. And because she has that unearthly beauty, you get the feeling that she's not exactly human. I mean, obviously Aslan is a lion, but Jadis takes on a human form. But you know, looking at her, that she's not human, and a lot of that is because of the design of the character, but a lot of that is also because of the actress playing her. And it also just creates a really great atmosphere of danger. I mean, you really feel the evil in this world as they're walking through the wintry Narnia. The character in the book was good and evil, but the character in the movie was really evil, and for that reason, she gets the point. And now, it's cold out here. Let's go on to other characters. We have quite a few characters to look at, and most prominent is probably Mr. Tumnus, the faun who is Lucy's introduction to Narnia. This character is actually pretty comparable in both versions of the story. He's kind and helpful, but also frightened of what the White Witch is capable of. Sometimes his courage fails, but he hates what the White Witch is doing, and in the end, he's on the right side. The Beavers, likewise, are loyal and true to Aslan and the Pevensies. In the movie, however, I do like that we get to see that Mr. Beaver never did trust Edmund early on.
Enjoying the scenery, are we?
In general, he's rather wary of others, which makes sense when you think about it. I mean, these are very dangerous times. Plus, I just think it's fun to watch Mr. and Mrs. Beaver bicker like an old married couple. In general, the characters fighting for Aslan are given a lot more weight in the movie. We don't see much of them, but you can feel the war weariness of these characters, which pushes this story out beyond the realms of just a fantasy and into the realms of an epic fantasy. But we also have to consider the characters fighting on the side of the White Witch. With Mogrim, the White Witch's chief of police, I have the same issue that I have with Aslan. When you have an animal behaving like a human and talking like a human, it's much more impressive to leave that up to our imagination rather than show their mouths moving. Also in the movie, it seems like each character on the White Witch's side has his own agenda, whereas in the book they just seem like her lackeys. Neither version is really better or worse than the other, and to be honest, I can see the benefit of both. But I think one thing that this movie really gives us is a good sense of a middle ground between good and evil. In the book it's all very clear-cut, but in the movie you really get a sense that this is a difficult choice that they're making. A choice of the enticing reality in front of them at the price of no more summer, and fighting for what they believe in at the price of their leader just not being around that much. Which seems like a much more accurate portrayal of the battle of faith than what we get in the book. And a lot of this comes through in the other characters, particularly the fox, who only appears briefly in the movie, but who seems like a character who very easily could have gone the other way and chose not to. So for that reason, I think the movie's portrayal of the other characters gives a lot more weight and power to the story. But now, let's see how the different styles of composition stack up against each other. It's not the easiest task in the world to make this particular story into a movie. I mean, think about it. In most movie adaptations, you have to actually cut material from the book in order to make it work as a movie. But this story is so short and simple that you actually have to add material. And the subplots are balanced pretty well, and in general, they help add weight to what was essentially a children's fairy tale, and they serve the story well. There's also a bit more build-up and climax as we switch back and forth between the different points of view at the end of the story, rather than just telling the whole story from Susan and Lucy's point of view, and then switching back to Peter and Edmund. But I actually like this style of storytelling in this case because, honestly, this story basically is a fairy tale. It's meant to be an allegory for the story of Christ, and so the fairy tale style of writing makes sense. Also, I've always really liked the style of writing that gives the omniscient narrator a personality. It's not a style of writing you typically see anymore, but authors like C.S. Lewis, L. Frank Baum, and Lewis Carroll used it a lot, as if they were actually sitting in front of you telling you the story. It serves as a nice reminder that this is, in fact, a story. I think we strive a little bit too much for realism in these stories, to the point where we actually treat the universe as if it's real. But this style of writing doesn't do that. The narrator knows exactly what's going to happen and even apologizes for some sections of the story. because this story exists exclusively in his head, and to be honest, it draws me more into the story to hear it as though it's actually being told to me by a person. And I do wish that more authors would write this way today, but for now, it's just enough to give the book the point for composition. But what about the images of Narnia, on screen and in our imagination? One thing you can definitely say about this movie is that it looks great. It gives us a very rich and detailed land of Narnia. I also like how much of the final battle they actually showed and how epic they made it, both with the alternating points of view and, of course, with the music. What I'm not crazy about, however, is the animal characters. Like I said before, I'm just not crazy about the way they made them talk. It just looks weird to me. In the books, you don't really have to imagine the mechanics of how they're talking, you just have to know that they are. Plus, I just like the way that Lewis describes everything, using that very simple and straightforward style like something out of a fairy tale. When I heard this story for the first time as a child, it sounded like something epic, just in the way that he described the land and the characters. The vistas in the movie are great and all, but this is one of those cases where you just can't beat the imagination of the reader, and C.S. Lewis definitely inspired that. And finally, it all comes down to story. Alright, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first. Yes, this is the story of Jesus. It's not really terribly well concealed, but to be honest, it's not like a bunch of other stories haven't done the exact same thing, and to be honest, it wasn't even new 2,000 years ago. It's a story of sacrifice and love in the face of greed and corruption, and it's universal and touching even if you're not religious. Or so I assume. So, does it matter that it's a fairly unabashed and obvious allegory of the story of Jesus? I would have to say no, it really doesn't. Obviously, if that's what you choose to take away from the story, then more power to you, and as far as that goes, it is a good allegory of that story. And a good message comes across without being exclusive to any one faith. It's strong enough that the movie really didn't have to change all that much. It's kind of taboo in Hollywood, or at least it seems that way, to make a movie that is in any way overtly religious, but the movie kind of works in the same way that the book does. You can take away a Christian message, but you don't have to. In fact, in general, the movie is pretty comparable to the book. They didn't change a whole lot, they just added a few extra scenes and some backstory to make the story more dramatic, and also longer. The book doesn't always flow in the way that you expect a story to. There's not much in the way of build-up and climax, whereas the movie really does have more of a flow and a feeling of epicness in the storyline. As I've already said, however, I love the simplicity of this story and the way that it comes off just like a fairy tale. There's also a real sense of telling it like it is with this story. This is the way it happened. And there's also a sense of giving you what is important from this story, and no more. I like, for example, that we focus more on Aslan and what Susan and Lucy did for him rather than the battle of Peter and Edmund. By the time we get to the battle, it's already underway, and by the time Aslan arrives, it's pretty much over. We still get to see Peter's leadership and Edmund's sacrifice, but by focusing more on what Aslan and Susan and Lucy did behind the scenes, it helps to illustrate the fact that this battle was not won by force. It was won by Aslan's sacrifice, which of course makes the allegory that much stronger. But there is something that the movie has that the book does not, which is the backdrop of World War II and the backstory of the Pevensies. And you could look at this as needless padding, but you could also look at it as pushing the story beyond its original parameters and making it more relevant to what's happening in their lives in the real world. The fear and panic that World War II inspired is echoed in the Battle of Narnia, and actually getting to see Peter and Edmund fighting alongside the stuff that's happening with Susan and Lucy brings the development of all four characters full circle in a much more complete and satisfying way. Also, showing us the onset of the battle shows us the loyalty that Aslan's army has to the ideals that Aslan holds dear, even though Aslan himself is not there. We see the hopelessness of their situation. Aslan is missing, possibly dead, and they're hopelessly outnumbered, but damn it, if they're going to die, they're gonna die fighting.
In numbers and weapons far greater than our own.
Numbers do not win a battle.
No. But I bet they help.
Which I think once again echoes what was happening in World War II at that time. It was 1940, the Nazis were everywhere, and everyone was losing. By putting those elements in, this becomes much more than just a simple fairy tale and becomes a more relevant and poignant story about standing up for your convictions even if things look hopeless. And I think that's the strongest message that you could take from a faith-based story. Hope. For that reason, even though the book is very good, I personally find the movie more inspiring. Well, that does it for another Books vs. Movies review, and I'm home, and despite my sister's interference, it seems that my winning streak remains intact, so...
I wouldn't pat yourself on the back just yet, Hatter.
Wait, where are you?
I'm behind the camera, dummy. Who do you think has been filming you this whole time? With a bow and arrow. Sweet.
Awesome, Lynn, with a bow and arrow. It's sweet. We're in the city.
And in a parking lot.
People living in Aslan have never actually seen him.
Living in Aslan?
Damn it.
Didn't get the hitchhiking thumb
okay.
in the shot. Oh, the music. Soundtrack is amazing. Let me silence my phone.
That'd be a good idea.
The bird over here is doing a really good job of tweeting in the same spot of that line every time you did that take. But I want your viewers to know about that bird.
Okay, know about that bird. He's out to ruin this review. Oh.
Anyway, I wouldn't go resting on your laurels just yet. You have no idea what I have in store for you next.
Oh, hi.
Oh, hi. Wait. What is it with you? I've been traveling all over the place and you're not even batting an eye. What are you doing?
Oh, just reading up for the next review.
Oh, you.
Funny. You'd think I'd be the one sucked into a book.